So how's everybody doing? I'm going to go ahead and get started on this. All right, is everybody here excited for ADA compliance training? I get some thumbs up. Where's this chat at? Let me see this chat. Let's get some thumbs up, some celebration parties. I mean, my goal in this is to try to make this really as least confusing as possible. And the reason for that, let me just get into some of the responses that you gave me here. Whoops. So what kind of software? Probably not very confusing or not very surprising that Microsoft Word was the #1 choice, followed by Docs, PowerPoint, Slides, and Acrobat Pro. As far as the main frustration of ADA compliance, we have the top winner of it being too complex. So what I'm hoping to do in this as well is just really clear up some of the complexity and make it more straightforward for people, because it's a little bit to get your head around, but then it is a lot simpler when you understand it, kind of big picture stuff. Okay, people are still joining, so I'm gonna slow down a little bit here. Amber says accessibility is a big part of what she does and is excited to get a refresher. Yes, that will hopefully be good for everybody. All right. So the complexity was the #1 concern with the survey. And then as far as the top 2 issues, we have that one really going to people wanting to have more shortcuts and how to do things more quickly. So that's something I really want to get into as well. Try to save time and make these not a nightmare to deal with when you have a PDF that's complex. So let me minimize this stuff here. So who determines what's compliant in the first place? This all started in 1990 with the ADA, the Americans with Disabilities Act. And this is the federal act that prohibits discrimination against people with disabilities every day. This also goes into like building elevators in buildings that only have staircases. It goes into all kinds of different things with physical disabilities. ADA compliance, what I'm going to talk about today, is really the digital side of this, because as you see, there's more than just the ADA on the screen. These all work together, and it's a little confusing. So you don't have to worry about memorizing this. You're all going to get copies of this presentation, by the way, at the end of the presentation. So you don't have to really worry about taking notes. I've got more than enough notes on all this material to refer you guys to. So just kind of sit back, relax, I'd say, but feel free to pop in any questions you have as I'm going through this. All right, any questions so far before I really just start tearing through this presentation? Are we all good? Okay. So 1990 was where it started from. And then we have the World Wide Web Consortium. That was in 94. And this is really the top name, because both this WAI, Web Accessibility Initiative, is part of the W3C. And then we also have this Convention of the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, which was adopted, it should say 2007. Whoops. And then we have the 2008 Web Content Accessibility Guidelines. This one is really important to know when you're dealing with websites in particular, but these standards have been going on for a long time, and they're getting further along. There's actually a WCAG 3 that just this July came into kind of like more of an active state. So things are evolving, but the main gist of all this is that what we need to understand is that everybody has the right to understand what's in a document or in a web page, just like anybody else. So there shouldn't be something that we put on the website or in a document that somebody with hearing or vision disabilities can't comprehend. The whole point of this is really just to make this fair for everybody. So for example, if somebody can't use their arms, they may use the sticky keys function on a Windows or Mac and a mouse stick to type the characters. That makes a lot of sense. So it should also make sense that somebody with hearing disabilities would want to have closed captions, or somebody who can't see clearly needs to use a screen reader. And then, it's not just 5% or 10% of the population. This is actually more like 15 to 20%. And, even if it wasn't this many people, closed captions benefit anybody in a loud environment, and good color contrast works better, and so does good design. everything I'm going to talk about is really going to be good for everybody. It's not just for people with disabilities. Any questions so far? Anything in the chat? You guys are quiet. Okay, so I have this index here, which should help clear up what it is that we're looking for exactly. So when I say, is this document ADA compliant? What that means is that all of these markers, so to speak, need to be accounted for. So alt text, I'm sure you've all heard of that. That's a really big one. That is providing alternate descriptions for text, images, diagrams, charts, things like that. We have headers, which need to be in a certain order, which I'll get into later. We have contrast, color, table structures, intuitive forms, things like that. And we also need to use things that, again, for everybody, readable fonts, we all want that. Accessible links. Now, this is something that I recently learned more about, but whenever you see that, click here to read this, here's what I'm talking about, or visit this website, click here. Can anybody tell me what's wrong with that language in a website or a document? So if I said, click here and visit more information, or if I said, more information can be found here. It's not really a good thing to use because it's not descriptive. It doesn't tell the person who's, for example, using a screen reader where that link is actually sending them. It should say something like, click here to download the PDF and learn more. Just telling them what the action of the click is doing is a huge part of it. Somebody wrote, could not see the link. Any questions with this so far? We have audio transcripts and video captions, which are pretty self-explanatory. There are a few more. I'm not going to get into them in this presentation. There are, buttons, keyboard controls.
So Jordan, I have a question.
Yeah.
So you're saying click here is okay as long as there's additional descriptor of what clicking here will do.
Yes.
If I'm hearing you correctly. Okay. All right, cool. Thank you.
Yeah, I guess I should have explained that better. It can't just say click here and that's it. Because what does that even mean? Click here for what? Click here for where? Click here for why am I clicking this? This needs to be clear for people. And the same thing with an image. If there's an image or an icon, like a PDF icon, for example, you wouldn't put alt text on the PDF icon, calling it a PDF icon. You would say download PDF, because the person doesn't really care if it's a PDF icon. They want to know what that does when they click on it. So if there's an icon, alt text, I thought it was just describing what it looks like, but it's really not just what it looks like, it's also where it goes. But I'll get into that in a little bit later. But that's a good question, Brandon. And then a few more things here that I'm not going to get into are like keyboard controls, because they're mostly used for by web developers, speech recognition, because that's really more about technology, understanding language and interpreting it. And then we have the understandable content, which is kind of just like common sense. Do you know how to write well in a way that's clear? We have check accessibility in Microsoft Word. Does anybody not know how to find this? I feel like this is probably one of the things everybody knows. On the screen here, normally when you open a Word, you have your document open. Under the Review tab, though, you should see a check accessibility. And that is one option to find it. That's the way I use here, but I'm going to Mac it's a little different. From the screenshot, you can also find this under the File menu, check accessibility. And then just like what I showed you, it's right there. And that's how you find that, because that's something probably important to go over. It's like one of the key things you're going to use all the time. When you first start up Acrobat, you probably won't see what I'm seeing here because this is not normally there. You have to usually click on more. And this is like all the way down to the bottom. I don't know why they do this. They put it down like here, but you need to just drag it up to your screen. I'm just going to put mine on the top for, quick demo purposes, but, this probably should be higher up in the list. So that way, when you open up Acrobat again, you can click on this button and you can then do your accessibility check. So in this example, what I'm doing is I'm
renaming a file in Windows to quickly copy the document title. So instead of renaming it, I'm actually just doing a Control-C, copying the title, and then when I head over to Menu, Document Properties, I'm now able to just go to Title and paste in and then remove anything extra for the title. It's just the fastest way to do it, and I think by that method, you're going to make less spelling errors.
Even if you go through Word and you name everything correctly, sometimes when you export them to PDF, it just doesn't have a title. But as you saw, File, Document Properties, paste the title in, that's easy. That one has to be done for everything. Jumping back into Word here for a second, I'm going to show you another example, because we're going to go down the list here and show you a few more.
In this example, the red was just too faint, so I had to change it to be a higher contrast for that to pass. And the same thing here with this heading. The blue just isn't enough contrast against the white, so a darker blue, when clicking OK, it all gets better.
It's pretty common sense, I'd say. If something looks like it's difficult to read, it probably is. So you should try to work on making the contrast better. And, I'm going to kind of fly through this here because we're all going to get a copy of this, but I tried making a checklist that will help you when you're making documents ADA compliant. So go ahead and just read this over for a second. Is anything here alarming, confusing, not what you expected? Just reading through the comments here. All right, so this is just a basic checklist, and it's a good thing to look at before you publish any document or before you convert it to Acrobat Pro, which is inevitably probably going to happen. So this is the same thing for PowerPoint and slides, just a little bit different. Most of this is the same, but one thing I want to point out, the biggest difference between slides, PowerPoint in one camp, and then we have Google Docs and Word in the other camp. The biggest difference that I've found with these, really, it's not much. It's just that the headings aren't able to be, like there's no heading styles inside PowerPoint or slides. It's just whatever font size you want, which is kind of funny because that's how people usually think about Word when they make headings. They just make the font bigger and make it bold, and they think it's a heading. I'm going to show you in a little bit that that's not really what a heading is, but in Google Slides and PowerPoint, it is. So creating accessible documents. Like I keep saying over and over again, ultimately it's Acrobat Pro that you're going to need to use before you publish anything to the web, because Word gets you some way there, PowerPoint gets you some way there. PowerPoint also has that built-in accessibility checker that I just showed you in Word. It has the same thing, which is fantastic. Google Slides and Google Docs do not have a built-in accessibility checker. There's some add-ons available that I've seen, but I'm not going to cover them here because I'm not approved at the time from this organization to use them or even demo them off. But there are other ways using plugins, using Google Docs, that you can make documents more accessible, which personally I prefer using Google Docs anyways. So having the option to have something accessible would be nice. But for now, the move is to just export it from Docs to Word, use the accessibility checker, and then, that whole thing. Or you could just export it to a PDF and check it that way too. Page reading order.
But going back to the Google Slides, you mentioned in there have at least 1.15 line spacing.
Yes.
Is that, when I've used the Wayne Reese Google Slides formats, they seem to be much tighter than that.
Yeah, this is here, I can show you on this right here. So honestly, when I read this, I'm going to be honest. The guide I read said 1.5. That's way too much. I'm sorry. No, I'm not going to do that. 1.5 is crazy. If I have a lot of information, that's going to. So I did say 1.15 because what you're just talking about here, John, is that this single space looks narrow, right? Because it does. So I would recommend 1.15 just to show you what the difference is there, because even this is kind of breaking compliance. But this is where it gets subjective. If it's readable, if this was a document and it was readable, then it's fine. You don't have to actually force yourself to make this 1.5. You know what I'm saying? It's really a matter of kind of subjectivity.
Yeah, I've
Any
actually
other-
been very frustrated with the Wayne Risa Google Slides templates that we use, because it seems to be even tighter than single. I mean, they seem to really be on top of each other in the body text. And I'm always changing it, wondering, can we change that centrally?
Yes, yeah. Within Google Docs and within PowerPoint, there is the ability to change the spacing so that when you make a new slide, it won't like keep resetting itself. It'll be reset to how you want it to be reset. So I can get into that. Maybe later on we can have a discussion about that, because I agree. I think 1 is too tight. I think 1.5 is way too much. But the point is, it just needs to be readable.
Jordan, could you bring that up with Dana though, maybe? Or is that something we should bring up with Dana? Because I think we're talking about everything moving forward coming out on that, right?
You're talking about as far as the
Because what he's
templates
talking about are templates that are created for us to use for our official work. So if that was like this,
Yeah.
obviously we can play with it and try to change it, but also like maybe that becomes like a RISA thing that we do, right? That we're in order to stay compliant.
Oh yeah, I will definitely have a discussion with her, and I think we should just go to the 1.15. That's what everything in this presentation is 1.15 spacing, and I don't think anybody has a hard time reading this. Do we? I mean, it's pretty generously big if this was like a document, Because what I want to go over here is the reading order, and maybe it's just better if I show you this video that I recorded. So before I talk about this and just show you this demo, I want to show you why this is important. So screen readers, they rely on a certain hierarchy of how to read a page or content. The first thing is the page number. It's not going to start on page 16 of 30 and then read, paragraph 4. It needs to have something that it follows. So page number, page order, headings, and then everything that follows that, text and media. So it's really important from somebody who can't see what the document looks like to be able to hear it in the correct order. I mean, wouldn't we all agree that's pretty important?
Okay, so this is the order panel in Adobe Acrobat, and in this example, I have an incorrect reading order. So the situation was that the 4 and 5 were swapped. I needed to get that 4 above the 5 in this situation that I was dealing with. But when I do this, just for the example, it disappears. When I move it back, it comes back again. But Acrobat does this sometimes. When you move content around, like here it is again, the content will just disappear. It's very strange. And if you could just do, you'd think you can do an undo, but you can't. It's actually missing, like it doesn't exist for the reading order panel, for example. Not sure why, but that's just how. So when you go to the edit PDF, instead here, go to the edit PDF, and then what you do is when you're in the edit PDF panel, I'm going to go back to that about the authors area here, and I'm going to select that text, and then I'm going to just copy it to the clipboard. So going back to the reading order panel, now this is weird, watch this. If I move it back to how it needs to be, it doesn't disappear. Very weird, but strange things like that can happen. This is just one of the weird ones that I wanted to show you. All right, so this is the reading order panel. When you click the 3 dots, click Show Reading Order Panel, you're able to then highlight elements on a page. So in this case, there's this Gallagher logo, and you can see me trying to select it more than one time. It did take me a couple tries, and just another one of those weird Acrobat things. It took me a few tries, but then I did tag it as a figure. And of course, that's great and everything, but I do need to go back and make sure that the reading order is correct. So I'm going to move things around a little bit there. Then when I go back and check my accessibility again, the alt text gets flagged, but this time I can actually fix it because it was tagged as a figure. Now, in other areas, we have the same thing, Show Reading Order Panel. One more time here. This is a more common thing. Your footers or something like that might not get tagged. So selecting the entire footer, which is what I'm doing here, I'm just going to mark all of this as text paragraph because that's what it is. So doing that, kind of just scrolling down the page, it makes this on every single page. So just as an example, I'm selecting it on more than one page here and just continuing to select text paragraph. Once you tag it, then you're able to go through and check the reading order again and make sure that everything works.
Okay, so sometimes you just want to give up. You want to hit your head against the wall. Has anybody been there? It's not just me, right? You've been stuck in a PDF document for like an hour. No, just me. Okay, so this is what I noticed was happens. Sometimes, don't throw your ego out of it. Don't work, work smarter, not harder. If there's a document like this that's just a total mess and has a million things wrong with it, don't try to go in there and fix it one by one. Do you want to waste your time? Like, just go to auto tag document, and as you'll see, it's going to make it a heck of a lot easier. It's not going to be perfect. For example, there was like, let me show you here. For example, there was, more than one H1 tag, which is not good. You want to have only one of those, and you want to have the tags go like an H1, H2, H3. And one more thing about tagging here, which is important to know about, which applies to Word, which applies to any document you make. If you have an H1 tag, which is like the heading of the document, title of the document, main page, heading 2 follows, right? You can't just go to heading 4. You have to go to heading 3, then to 4. Then you can go back to 2 if you want, but you have to go from 2 to 3 to 4. You can't jump around. Does that make sense? You can jump back though. You can go from like heading 1, 2, 3, 4, and then back to heading 2 again, but you can't go forwards with it. Does that make sense? Because if you do that, it's going to flag itself. I don't have any examples in this presentation, but it will flag as an error if you have your headings out of whack. Just another example of what auto tagging did. It's kind of a quick example, but this element here, I was trying for a long time to get it tagged and it wasn't working. With the reading order panel, which is up, this was not working for me. So the only way I could fix it was with the auto tag feature. But I show this to you kind of at the end because when you auto tag documents, it's going to retag everything. So if you have like 50 pages and you have a problem with just one page, I wouldn't really recommend auto tagging it again. Does that make sense? Because then you're going to have to do everything over again. Like, we don't want that.
So in this example, using Microsoft Word, in the accessibility panel, there's this review auto-generated descriptions, and that's the same thing as missing alt text, basically. We just have to review them manually. One way to check for alt text is to right-click on the image and then just select View Alt Text. And it's going to show you here that it has low confidence over this screenshot of a computer AI description. So you need to fix that and put in something that's much more descriptive. And when there's something like a chart or table or screenshot even, if there's data already in the text itself, you can just mark it as decorative. Not everything has to be actually, it causes more confusion when you have it in there twice. So you don't need to put in what the alt text says if it's already in the text itself. Okay, now using Acrobat Pro, this is the first thing that always happens. You just need to click on Pass basically for the language and title if the title's present. And then, just going through and fixing some alt text here. Another graph example, something like this, if this text was embedded and it wasn't available to be read by a screen reader, you would have to figure out ways to get it into a screen reader, which would be the alt text. And so to do that quickly, I'm using Snagit and using the OCR technology built into it, where I can then read the text, which is pretty awesome, paste it in. Formatting doesn't really matter here at this point, next to but this, spell check, things like that's all built into this. And then just cleaning up the chart itself. So what I'm doing is I'm making the chart descriptive here, so it makes sense to a screen reader. If someone just read this out loud, it would make sense of what the chart is trying to communicate.
Any questions before I keep going? Chat here.
Jordan, I have a question. This
Yes.
is Jackie. Somewhere along the way, at some point, I had read from I don't know where actually, that when doing alt text, it's better to keep it as simple as possible. You don't have to give a lot of detail in alt text for an image. We do a lot of screen capture for software training. And my practice since learning that has just been to call it screenshot of, you know, whatever it's screen it's capturing without detail. So is there a different opinion about that, that you should actually put more descriptive text as the alt text?
Yeah, so okay, great question. The best way to describe that here, bear with me for a moment because I think I can actually pull this up to show you what I'm talking about. So you are right about this, and what I've read about, let me go to the spot that I'm actually talking about here. So, for example, in this one right here, I marked this one as decorative. I didn't even give this a description. And the reason I didn't give this description, because it doesn't really add any relevance or value to a screen reader, because all the information is already in the text. So in your case of having a chart or something very detailed and complex, the only time you'd ever really need to use that screen reader technology I showed is if that text does not exist in the document itself. What I was trying to show in my example here of this more complex chart is an example of where these were not, I'm pretending that these were not actually text. So there's no way a machine can read this text. So therefore I have to screen read it and put it into a text format. But that's kind of like the exception to the rule. Normally, the rule of thumb that I read too on this was keep it like a tweet, keep it like 180 characters. And you normally should. But when you absolutely can't read data on a chart because it's only been scanned, you do have to figure out a way to get that inside the alt text.
So one other option might be then to copy that text into the body of the document.
Yes.
And not in the alt text of the image.
Yes.
And then you could keep the alt text simple. Is that accurate?
That is totally accurate.
Okay.
Yep.
That's what I need.
Yep. I'm actually just going to show you this in Word. Under the review tab, if I selected things, I could just have this read to me what I selected, which can be helpful. And so, you could use your screen reader technology. I'm not going to cover this in great detail, but you can have screen readers read you back the document, which is really the ultimate way to test if it works, if it's ADA compliant. I realize that takes time, and I don't do it every time, either. But to make a document 100% compliant, you really do need to listen to it so it can follow a table, especially in order. But what you would do is just select the whole document and select read aloud. And if it makes sense to you, that's great, because again, it's going to follow that format of reading like the headings first, then the content. So you'll know also what the order is. And that's why that page reading panel was so important. Okay. So getting into websites, I just want to put it out there right now that there's really no information that you haven't learned already from this presentation that you need to apply here, because everything works the same. Websites, PDFs, they're all digital content that's viewable on the World Wide Web, right? So when it comes to making websites compliant, we just are going for this kind of middle ground level AA, because level AAA is literally impossible to meet. And that's what they say. I read that online from the organization. It says that it's not possible. So we have to go for AA. And if you're curious about what that means, here's actually a breakdown of what the levels mean. And hopefully this all makes sense. It's pretty straightforward and standard. Some common issues that come up with websites. It's usually broken links, broken image links, no alt text on images. Non-descriptive links, remember that's where the learn more isn't really a good idea. It needs to explain the purpose of what the link is. Grammar errors, spelling errors, and then incorrect heading structure. And there's other issues too, like color contrast, accessibility, forms, things that really you probably won't have to worry about that much, but these top 6 are big ones. And I wanted to leave this open for questions, and also I'd be happy to do some real-time, testing here as well. I could even go ahead and I'm not lying, guys. I have not tested this out. This is my actual PDF that I've exported here from the presentation today. Let's see what happens. Let's see how terrible it is. I exported this thing right from Slides, right? So it hasn't had any kind of accessibility checker to it. So I'm going to be curious along with you to see how this looks. So the very first thing I'm going to do is click this prepare for accessibility. That's why I dragged it up higher on the list. And so I don't necessarily want to auto tag it just yet. Okay. I don't want to necessarily do any of that kind of stuff. I can tell there's no tags available if I click on the tags over here though. So I will have to auto tag it, but you know, let's go ahead and do an accessibility check here anyways. Yep, I'm not surprised. Lots of errors. So what do, everybody? You can either go to the tags here and say auto tag document, or you can go over here and click auto tag document. So there's some really good news with this. And I've come to discover that Acrobat, after like 6 years, finally did an update on how they scan documents and tag them. This is a really big deal because I've been using this for like 6 years and I've never seen any kind of advancement. It's like it's like they forgot about this program. Well, recently they did update this auto tag document feature, which is just going to save everybody so much time. And I know it's better because I compared, older documents with newer documents and it tagged it much better. So moving forward, that's how it works. Now it said no tags. Now we have tags. We have lots of tags. Lots and lots of different tags. There's the heading 1 that it correctly identified. We can't have it a second heading 1. We have to make this a heading 2. All right. You can just do that by simply typing it in there from a 1 to a 2. You can also right click properties, but when you're going through this and checking the headings, because the thing that I usually check for when I go and do the go back to accessibility check. And, after I'll get to this in a second here. You're probably gonna have a lot of alt text that fails. All right. This is like the number one thing that happens all the time with documents. And I'm not gonna make you watch me fix all that kind of stuff. And then we have some table issues. Tables. You all thought I forgot about tables. Tables are my arch enemy. They make everything difficult. I'm saying this because even when it comes to websites, if something doesn't need to be a table, like don't make it a table. It just makes it difficult to translate. Now I get it. You have to make things tables sometimes. This is a table. But according to Acrobat Pro and the rules that follow, every table has to have a header. So to make this document compliant, I would actually need to add header to this. Because if I go over here and say show in tags panel and show you the structure a little bit of this, the TR stands for table row, and this stands for table cell, even though it's TD. Don't ask me why. But these are just identified here as, to fix this problem, technically, so I can get this element to stop failing. Let's go back to tags panel. I'm almost sure that if I just change these two from a TD to a TH, which is a table header, you can, by the way, you can copy these, you can paste them in like that. These are good time-saving techniques because as you're burying yourself in these accessibility tags, you can do stuff like this too. You can actually hold down Command and Control, and you can right-click on multiple tags, go to properties, and I can change it to whatever I want, But in this case, I want it to be table header. So the correct structure for a table, I'm going to try to show you how this works. So we have each row, right? TR is table row. I hope that makes sense. This needs to be a header, but we don't put the header there. We put the header inside of it like this, because these are identifying the cells. So now let's check this out. If I have a heading row and I go back here and I say check again, it didn't fail. See on this page, it didn't. This one it did because I haven't done it yet. So if I do the same thing, show in tags panel, if I just need to correct this error I'm not really saying this is, you really should go back and add a heading to this. Like I'm just doing this for demo purposes, but I'm just showing you that it's flagging these because according to Acrobat, it needs to have the heading rows be here, or, you know, if there's some over here, if this was a heading, for example. But now that we have this corrected as headers, oops, I go back here. And now that one less, and then here's, okay, this happens too. Good example, show in tags panel. This is not a table, right? It's not. So what we're gonna do is go down to as far as we can kind of go. We have all these nested tags, which is kind of ridiculous. It's a lot of different things. So I'm going to hold down Control and select both. I'm going to then drag these out underneath the figure. And then this right here, I'm just going to delete completely. So we have now not table. It's not even a heading either. It's just a paragraph text, just a normal text. You have a question? Oh, no questions.
So, Jordan, I have a question.
Yeah.
So if you spend the time doing all this accessibility check stuff in a Word document, and you get it so that it's, you know, quote unquote, meets requirements, whatever. When you then save that document, because I like to have my Word document, but then I save it as a PDF also.
Yes.
Should that PDF automatically be accessible because I took care of all of that in Word, or is it likely that Acrobat may catch some things and then I have to go do it again in Acrobat?
Yeah, great question, Brandon. I wish the answer was do it in Word, you're done. But for whatever reason, that heading, that title one that I showed you first, where I copy and paste the document title, the heading title almost always fails, even if you export it correctly from Word. It's weird. I don't know why it does that. So you usually do need to open up Acrobat, but that's a simple fix. It's so quick. If I, like, for example, in this document here, if I had no title here, right? And I go over here to accessibility check. Let's just do it again. Title failed. This one almost always fails. So what I've done, another kind of quick tip, keyboard shortcut thing, but Control D for, I guess, document properties, Control D, Control V, done. Right click, fix, done. That happens in almost every document where you have to just rename it, give it a title again, whatever. Now this bookmarks thing failed. I'm not going to get into too deep here because I want to show you guys something else that's really exciting here, but this just means you have to manually tag your bookmarks. And so in Word, right, when you create a table of contents, it usually is based off headers, right? So in my case, I probably would want to have, you know, when I go through here, I'd want to have it be maybe my headers be my bookmarks. So I'll click OK. All right. And that's probably a good way to navigate the document anyways, right, through headings. But okay, I'm going to take a segue here and show you guys something. ADA is a lot to cover. All right, it's a lot of stuff. And it can be very confusing, and I can't show everything in videos. But what I have been doing is building a resource kind of behind the scenes here where I have logged like every single issue that I've come across in Acrobat. So when you come across these different issues, you'll be able to go and look at different solutions of how you can fix it. I want this to be a good resource where people can go and dive in. And, you know, I even gave them like, you know, challenge ratings. Like this is a 5-star because it's going to require a bunch of different steps. You know, has to be run through checker, has to be manually, you know, tagged in the right order. After it's auto tagging, you know, has to make sure everything's good. There's just a lot of problems that can go wrong with a scanned only document. But other things you're going to run into, I have them all here for Acrobat Pro, and I have a lot of them here for Word. Now, Brandon, you asked a really good question about Word, and here's a really big one. This one will definitely influence PDFs if you export them from Word. If you have tables, and they go across like multiple pages, please check this repeat as header row on top of each page. Because we found out that if you don't check that, it's very difficult in Acrobat Pro to fix that table problem. It thinks that every new page needs a new header, and it doesn't understand that it's the same table. So little things like this, you know, are going to be, oh, you know what, before I take one more questions here, I want to show you guys something else too. That's really important. Stepping away from Acrobat Pro for a second, let's get back into Word. And I just want to show you that if I have a document here, right, home screen, mostly you're probably going to see that it says normal. All right, these are your headings in Word. You want this to be heading 1. If I click heading 1, it gets all crazy and weird, right? If I right click on it and say modify, or if I say update heading to match, now this is a heading 1 and it's tagged as a heading 1. And now if I go over here and I say modify, I can then change the color. I showed this kind of quickly in that example of mine. I don't know why I don't see color here. That's weird. Well, the point is, you know, here's one that I went through here recently. I just want to show you guys how to quickly check for headings. So this is a heading 2. If I were to then modify the style, here we go, and change the color to something crazy like nuclear orange. Now in Word, I can scroll down the document and I can know that clicking these orange, right? I could tell that's going to be tagged correctly as a heading 2. I'm not going to save the document with these orange headings, but I'm using them so that if this thing wasn't tagged, right? Say that somebody thought this looked like a heading. It's bigger, it's bold. That's a heading, right? But it's not, because if I triple click it, it's just a normal text until I click heading 2. And then when you want to fix it and you're all set, you just go to modifying and you just make it what you want then. So that's that. Any questions here? We have about 10 minutes left. I'm sure we have something else that we can discuss. So this should really be a good way to have a good resource. I mean, because when I'm doing this stuff, I'm constantly finding new problems to solve that I never run into before. And just over the time I've been here, I guess these are what's come up with everybody's documents here. And by the way, if you sent me a document to check for this demo, I will email you the fixed version of that, because everything you guys sent me, I did fix for PDF remediation. But yeah, that resource, I would encourage you to check it out, because this is going to have everything, you know, by type. If it's just a text issue, a forms issue, a tags issue, you know, you can go through here and find stuff.
Jordan, I think this is Celeste Johnson. I think you did an awesome job. I don't have any questions right now, but I know I will once I start to play with it a little bit, and then I'll come back and maybe have some questions.
I agree with Celeste. Thank you for this overview. It's helpful, and thank you for the updating my document. I appreciate that.
I don't know whose it was, but somebody's document took me a long time.
Yes, I saw one of them in your examples. I was like, cool.
I kind of got, it's weird, but I mean, as preparing for this, I kind of got excited when the errors were especially challenging, because like that just gives me more documentation to throw into my kind of like wiki that I have. Because this stuff takes a long time to get your head around, especially when you start dealing with tagging and nesting things. And yeah, it's a lot. But reach out to me if you have any questions, and I'm always here, you know, to help you with this kind of stuff.
Thank you. Thanks, Jordan.
You're welcome.
Thank you.